A decorated four-star general, a man with a chest full of medals, steps in front of the cameras. He looks right into the lens and calls Donald Trump a complete disgrace. He calls him a danger to the nation. Instantly, every major news network breaks into special coverage. The headlines scream that the military establishment has turned its back, and the political experts in Washington sit around their shiny glass tables and declare that this is the absolutely end. They want the public to believe that if a top ranking general says it, it must be the undisputed truth, and everyone should just blindly agree. But pull back the curtain. What actually happens when a Washington general launches an attack like that against Donald Trump? The reality is something the mainstream news completely ignores. This is not a story about a chaotic president. This is a story about a massive, untouchable system suddenly facing a leader who refuses to play their insider games. For decades, the political capital has run on a very specific, unbreakable blueprint. The career politicians approve the massive budgets. The military generals fight the endless foreign wars. And the massive defense contractors make billions of dollars. It is a very comfortable club. Everyone gets promoted. Everyone gets powerful board seats when they retire, and nobody ever stops to ask if these overseas conflicts are actually protecting the everyday citizen. Then comes Donald Trump. He walks right into the Pentagon, sits down, and starts asking the exact questions no one is ever allowed to ask. Why are American troops still sitting in the middle of a foreign desert 20 years later? Why are weapon systems costing 10 times more than they should? Why are the borders of this nation wide open while the military is ordered to guard borders thousands of miles away? When a career general calls Trump a disgrace, it is not a genuine insult. It is a frantic distress signal. It is a loud alarm bell ringing through the deeply entrenched halls of the establishment. The men with the shiny stars on their shoulders are not angry because Trump is a failed leader. They are angry because he is the first leader in modern history to look them in the eye and say, no. They are absolutely furious because he demands that the military put the country first. When that word, disgrace, leaves the general's mouth, the media machine immediately goes into overdrive. The television networks repeat the clip every single hour of the day. They spin a carefully crafted narrative to make the public believe that the entire armed forces have completely rejected Donald Trump. But they are making a massive mistake. They are deeply confusing the elite brass in Washington with the actual boots on the dog ground. Look at the regular soldiers. Look at the working class men and women who actually do the fighting, the bleeding, and the dying. They do not see a disgrace. They see a commander in chief who finally values their lives more than a foreign policy experiment. To understand the absolute panic in Washington, one simply has to follow the money. War is a heavily profitable business for a very small, exclusive group of people. For years, the cycle was completely predictable. Generals push for more military involvement overseas, politicians blindly approve billions in funding, and massive defense companies cash the checks. And when those same generals finally retire, where do they go? They walk straight into highly paid jobs on the board of directors for those exact same defense companies. It is a revolving door of endless money and endless conflict. Donald Trump threw a giant wrench into that perfectly oiled machine. He demanded that troops come home from distant lands that most people cannot even find on a map. He demanded an absolute end to the forever wars that drained the wealth of the South nation and broke the bodies of its youth. Every single time he ordered a troop withdrawal, he was directly cutting into the deep pockets of the military industrial complex. So when a high ranking official stands at a podium and violently attacks his character, it is never about morality or honor. It is entirely about protecting a multi-billion-dollar business model that heavily relies on constant global chaos. The political establishment is terrified because Trump exposed their greatest secret. He showed the world that a nation does not need to be the policeman of the entire globe to be safe. He proved that true strength is securing your own borders and protecting your own citizens first. The Washington Generals call him a disgrace simply because he firmly refuses to sacrifice another generation of young Americans just to keep the defense contractors rich. They desperately wanted a puppet who would just sign the checks and ask zero questions. Instead, they hit a solid brick wall. Notice what happens in the days immediately following these very public attacks. The media expects the public support to crash. They completely expect the everyday voter to abandon Donald Trump in pure shock. Instead, the exact opposite happens. The support actually grows stronger. The crowds at the political rallies get even bigger and much louder. The working class looks at the television screen, listens to the very angry generals, and realizes something extremely important. If the people who broke the system are this angry at Donald Trump, then he must be doing exactly what he promised to do. Every single time an establishment figure uses a word like disgrace, the plan completely backfires. The everyday citizens living in the heartland of the country know exactly what a real disgrace looks like. A real disgrace is a military budget of nearly $1 trillion while broken veterans sleep on the cold city streets. A real disgrace is sending billions of dollars in advanced weapons to foreign countries while local towns cannot even afford but to fix their own crumbling bridges or keep their own schools safe. The public is no longer blind to these harsh realities. They have finally woken up to the massive deception. For a very long time, the political class heavily relied on the uniform. They truly believed that if they put a man with 4 stars on his collar in front of a microphone, the public would just quietly nod and obey. They use the absolute respect that everyday citizens have for the military as a shiny shield to hide their own massive failures. But Donald Trump completely shattered that shield. He taught the public to deeply respect the rank and the soldier, but to fiercely question the hidden political agenda of the man wearing the suit and the medals. The generals are furious because their ultimate authority is finally being challenged by a leader who answers only to the voters. They are dealing with a president who looks at a bad military deal, shakes his head, and walks right away from the table. When they call him a danger, they are actually telling the truth. He is a massive danger to their unchecked power. He is a danger to the comfortable status quo that kept them wealthy and unaccountable for decades. The bitter insult is not a sign of his weakness. It is the absolute ultimate proof that the deep swamp is finally being drained at the very highest levels of the Pentagon. Watch the coordinated effort that unfolds right after the general drops his carefully planned insult. It is never just a single interview. Suddenly, the exact same talking points appear on every single news channel. The big newspapers print the exact same headlines. It is a highly organized, completely synchronized attack designed to break the spirit of the people who voted for genuine change. The Washington elite desperately need the public to feel isolated and completely wrong. They want to create a massive illusion that Donald Trump stands entirely alone, abandoned by the very institutions that hold the country together. But the absolute truth is that the institutions are the ones standing alone, completely disconnected from reality. The political class is terrified of a concept that used to be simple common sense. That concept is putting the homeland first. For generations, the establishment experts believed that national success meant heavily managing the borders of foreign nations, funding foreign governments, and policing the entire globe. Donald Trump completely flipped that upside down. He stated loudly that a nation is absolutely nothing without strong borders of its own. He made it crystal clear that the priority must always be the factories, the towns, and the families right here at home. When the military brass cannot control a president, they always resort to character assassination. They simply cannot argue against the actual policies because bringing troops home and saving trillions of dollars is quite incredibly popular with normal citizens, so they have to violently attack the man himself. They call his behavior a disgrace because they cannot publicly admit that his actual policies are heavily threatening their global empire. They desperately need the public to focus on the manufactured drama instead of looking closely at the massive financial shift happening right behind the scenes. The true disgrace in Washington is a system that demands blind obedience from the highest elected official in the land. The career politicians and the elite generals have operated without any real oversight for so long that they actually believe they are completely in charge of the country. Donald Trump is the harsh wake-up call they never saw coming. He is the immovable object blocking the path of their endless war machine. When they lash out in pure anger on national television, it is the undeniable sound of a very old, very corrupt system completely losing its total grip on absolute power. Look very closely at the actual track record of the establishment experts who are so quick to throw insults on television. For the last several decades, what exactly have these elite generals actually won? The public has watched trillions of tax dollars completely vanish into the sand. The public has seen endless foreign conflicts end in absolute chaos and total disaster. These are the very same leaders who confidently promise victory year after year while secretly knowing the strategy was completely broken. They never faced any real consequences for their massive failures. They simply retired, collected their massive pensions, and took their seats at the corporate table. Then Donald Trump steps into the Oval Office and demands total accountability. He looks at a room full of shiny metals and asks for actual measurable results. When the results are missing, he does not just quietly accept the excuses. He pushes back. He demands better. In the private, insulated world of Washington power, demanding actual competence is considered an absolute outrage. The generals are simply not used to a president who treats the military budget like real money and treats the lives of soldiers like precious treasure. They are used to presidents who just nod, smile for the cameras, and hand over a completely blank check. The word disgrace is essentially a desperate weapon of psychological warfare. The ultimate goal is to make the everyday American voter feel foolish for demanding a government that actually works for them. The elites want the public to believe that only a highly credentialed insider from Washington is smart enough to understand the world. But the everyday citizen can clearly see the absolute mess the insiders have made. The voters see the massive national debts and the completely ignored borders. When the military brass attacks Donald Trump, they are actually attacking the millions of everyday citizens who finally demanded a massive change. They are deeply insulted that the working class dared to elect a leader who completely bypasses the massive bureaucracy and speaks directly to the people. The absolute panic on their faces is entirely clear. They know the public is no longer buying the highly polished lies. The curtain has been pulled all the way back, and the total failure of the old establishment is finally out in the open for everyone to clearly see. Think about exactly what happens next. The Washington insiders are finally realizing their old television tricks no longer work. The more they scream on camera, the more power they lose in reality. Donald Trump is completely restructuring how the government operates at the most fundamental level. He is taking the absolute power away from the unelected bureaucrats and handing it right back to the everyday citizens. This is a massive historic shift in power. The elite generals and the career politicians are completely terrified because they are watching their entire empire crumble right in front of their eyes. For decades, the standard political playbook was incredibly simple. If you want to destroy a political outsider, you send out a highly respected military figure to completely ruin his reputation on national television. But that old playbook is entirely broken now. The everyday American voter has finally caught on to the corrupt game. When they hear an angry, retired general loudly complaining about Donald Trump, they do not hear a warning to be feared. They hear a massive victory siren. It means the America First agenda is successfully ripping through the deeply corrupt halls of Washington. It means the dark days of sending American wealth overseas to fund endless foreign conflicts are back, officially over. Notice how the mainstream news completely refuses to talk about the actual peace deals. They absolutely refuse to show the massive financial savings when the government finally stops buying overpriced weapons. They only want to show the public the anger, the outrage, and the manufactured drama. They desperately want to hide the simple fact that a strong, secure nation does not actually need to be in a constant state of war to survive and thrive. The military is finally being rebuilt to fiercely defend the actual homeland, not to act as an armed police force for the distant corners of the earth. So when the television networks broadcast these highly coordinated attacks, just remember exactly what you are watching. You are watching a very desperate last minute attempt to protect a completely broken system. The Washington elites are deeply backed into a corner with nowhere left to go. They have absolutely nothing left but empty, bitter insults. Calling the president a disgrace is their absolute last resort. They are finally waking up to the harsh reality that no matter how loud they yell from their television studios, they can never again control a public that has finally tasted true freedom and real, fearless leadership. The final chapter of this story is not being written in the Pentagon or the shiny television studios of Washington. It is being written in the living rooms, the factories, and the local diners all across the nation. When the history books finally record this incredible era, they will not focus on the manufactured outrage of retired generals who simply lost their grip on power. They will focus on the massive awakening of the American public. For the very first time in modern history, the everyday citizen looked right past the shiny medals, looked past the coordinated news headlines, and saw the absolute truth. They saw a massive political and military machine that had completely forgotten how to serve its own people. Donald Trump stood up to the most powerful, deeply entrenched system in the entire world, knowing exactly what they would do to him. He knew they would call him a danger. He knew they would use every single microphone they had to call him a total disgrace, but he took the absolute full force of their anger so the country could finally see the deep corruption hiding in plain. This is exactly what happens when a true disruptor enters the absolute highest level of government. The system violently attacks, the system lies, and the system coordinates massive smear campaigns. But the system ultimately loses because it has completely lost the trust of the very people it was supposed to protect. The era of blind loyalty to the Washington establishment is permanently over. The old guard can shout at the television cameras all they want, but the volume is turned all the way down in the homes of the everyday voters. The public is no longer listening to the deeply conflicted experts who sold away the safety and the incredible wealth of the nation. The people are firmly standing behind the leader who took the harsh insults, took the massive hits, and never backed down. So the very next time a television screen flashes with another elite general calling the president a total disgrace, do not panic and do not worry. Just smile and understand that the massive swamp is loudly complaining as the water finally drains away for good.